It's great to see you. It's great to see you, and thank you very much for coming. Um, I'm very enthusiastic about this topic. If my memory serves me well, Dhammavidya said uh, the Lotus Sutra, the message of the Lotus Sutra is just see Buddhas everywhere, and I want to kind of expand this a bit this afternoon and into the notion of let's see Pure Lands everywhere. And again, they're my kind of thoughts that I've come up with. They're they're not gospel in any sense at all. But I hope they're quite helpful in terms of helping us think what being ecumenical might mean. I take ecumenical to mean inclusiveness. And by that, I don't mean that we should all be the same. I think in the history of the word ecumenical, which is predominantly, I suppose, a Christian history, the idea was that you go back to a kind of unity where everybody's kind of literally singing from the same hymn sheet. I don't think that's what we should be concerned with. I think we should be concerned with inclusiveness. And I want to try and demonstrate to you how I think just seeing Pure Lands everywhere leads to, or can lead to, inclusiveness. And I think that the whole idea, as Sampranana said very persuasively yesterday, with his, I love the screensaver with the lanes on the motorway and the trees at the side. I thought that was awesome. We don't all have to have the same vision of the Pure Land, even if we think we do. We probably don't. And I think the important thing is not that we have a particular vision of the Pure Land, but that we have a vision of the Pure Land, okay, to inspire us. And let's be aware that Buddhist history, particularly Mahayana Buddhist history, is absolutely crammed full of Pure Lands of different varieties. If we could argue all day about what and where the Pure Land is, and is it before we die? Is it after we die? Is it both? Is it a physical location? Is it in the West? Is it a symbol? All the questions are endless. But I think we can have a fundamental definition: is that Pure Lands are lands or spheres or conceptual places where a Buddha reigns, where the influence of a Buddha prevails, where greed, hatred, and delusion don't prevail, where ego doesn't prevail. So if we take that as a kind of all-embracing thing, and keep that in the back of our minds. And of course, the one that we focus on is Sukhavati, the Pure Land of Bliss, Amida's Pure Land. I was going to say our Pure Land, but of course it's Amida's Pure Land, away to the west. And that's the one that we concentrate our practice on. And when I talk about diversity this afternoon, I'm not trying to suggest that we should all concern ourselves with meditating on other Pure Lands and things like that. That's not what I'm after. I absolutely accept that we need a kind of central discipline, and that discipline is to view Sukhavati as the main Pure Land with which we're concerned. But historically, and still today, other Pure Lands are available, as they say. And there's the Tusita heaven of Tibetan and Korean Buddhism. There is Abhirati, the Buddha Akshobhya's Pure Land to the east, which is supposed to be a land of extreme joy. There is Padmagarbha, the land of the womb of the lotus. And I can never say, I've been trying to practice how to say this next one, but probably fairly unsuccessfully. But it's Vedyaranirabhasa, which is the land of luminous lapis lazuli, which sounds fantastic, really. I love all this kind of poetic stuff, and you can imagine the color. There's a lot of colourfulness in Tibetan Buddhism. And I think that the land of lapis lazuli just brings it home brilliantly, really. Okay, so these are all different, and that's not an exhaustive list, but those are all examples of Pure Lands in the history of Mahayana Buddhism. And they're all conceptualized, as I say, as Buddha fields, where a particular Buddha dwells, waiting for our arrival, in the absence of a living Buddha in the world at the moment. So I think, as well as seeing Pure Lands everywhere in the history of Buddhism, it is also important to realize that Pure Lands are not just a feature of Pure Land schools. Obviously you've got the Japanese Pure Land schools, for example, Jodo Shu and Jodo Shinshu. But Pure Lands have been a feature of other schools which don't identify themselves as Pure Land. So, for example, Pure Land practices are featured in non-Pure Land schools in Japan. For example, Tendai Buddhism, which is the school traditionally on Mount Hiei near Kyoto. It's the school in which both Honen, Shinran, Dogen, and Nichiren, all, as I understand it, trained before they went off on their own directions. Well, Pure Lands feature in those schools. Also, if you go back further, if you go back to the Nara period of Japanese history, which is, I don't want to get all anarchy about this, but that's between 710 and 794 CE, the Nara period, the period when Nara was the capital of Japan. The rituals in that period, the rituals of the Shingon, Sanron, Kigon, and Hosso sects all included Pure Land practices. So you're talking about a time roughly 500 years before Honen selected the Nembutsu as his primary practice. 500 years before that, Pure Land practices were already a feature of a variety of Buddhist sects in Japan. Later in the medieval period is an interesting one as well, because there was a lot of talk yesterday about Ippen. I know Bhaktika is particularly enthusiastic about Ippen, and I know that he and Sampranana put together a wonderful service about Ippen. And I was thinking about the time of Ippen and the wandering hijiri of the Jishu, the wanderers in Japan at that time. And a feature of Japan at the time of Ippen was the growth of a market economy. Now you might think, well, how's that relevant? Well, what happened was that, putting this is in very broad strokes, but for the first time during Ippen's lifetime and people like him, agriculture was producing a surplus in Japan. So it wasn't just subsistence agriculture. For the first time, they were producing enough rice, etc., to trade, to sell, so you get the growth of a money-based economy rather than just a kind of bartering type stuff or swapping things. And when you get the growth of a market economy, you get marketplaces, literally marketplaces, crossroads, etc., where people mingle together in a way that they hadn't done before. And all the accounts of Ippen's lifetime give us this very colourful picture of a host of people from different parts of Japan meeting together in these marketplaces, of entertainment, sometimes rather dodgy things going on, a lot of gambling, perhaps a bit of prostitution, Pure Land hijiri, wandering shamans, Taoist priests, all this rich, fertile ground in which religious practices all kind of merged together. And so, for example, Taoism at this time and shamanism at this time all mention Pure Lands in different kinds of contexts, and they have different views of what Pure Lands are, but everything mixes together. So there's no such thing as a kind of Pure Land practice, if that makes sense. There's always been lots of other influences coming in, and this is healthy. This is good stuff. So there were literally at that time as well Pure Lands everywhere. That's a very broad sweep of a particularly complex period in Japanese history, but those are the sort of things that were going on and which lead to a plethora of kind of Pure Land and Pure Land related practices. So, of course, history demonstrates not just a huge variety and range of Pure Lands, it also, as we know, history generates a whole set of differing ideas about how one gets to the Pure Land. And this is where a lot of controversy lies, of course. Do you meditate? Do you chant? Do you visualize? Do you dance? Even in Ippen's case, what is the way to the Pure Land? There's lots of different ways. Okay. And also, I want to take this even further, really, because I suppose what I've accounted for now is the fact there are different lanes on motorways, and it's a broad path to get to the Pure Land or Pure Lands. But equally, if we define a Pure Land, and this is, not everybody's definition of a Pure Land, but if you follow my kind of definition of a Pure Land, which is an area which is free from greed, hatred, and delusion and ego, you can start to see Pure Lands in all kinds of unexpected places, not just within Buddhism. And I think this is so, so important in this day and age where the interfaith imperative is so strong. We have to get on with people from other faiths. So we have to recognize that Pure Lands are not just Buddhist, but you can find them anywhere, really, because anywhere which is free of greed, hatred, and delusion, and which is free of ego, is by definition under the influence of a Buddha or Buddhism that people may not realize, but according to our way of looking at the world and our understanding of things, it's by definition a Pure Land. So, for example, we can start to appreciate, this is not our practice, but we can appreciate that Christian and Islamic notions of heaven and the afterlife have a strong Pure Land aspect to them, in terms of their descriptions. You can even start to see Pure Lands in secular philosophy. I'm a big Buddhism as a religious fan. It's a religion fan. That's one of the big things I took. I got from Dharma teachings is this idea of a religion, and we talked about this a bit yesterday. But let's be honest. A lot of people who do not consider themselves religious, who may not even consider themselves spiritual, but are very much thinking in terms of wanting a world where greed, hatred, and delusion and ego don't operate. And I think we have to respect that, and we have to recognize that they are our brothers and sisters too. We conceptualize things differently, and of course, from our point of view, one of the problems of envisioning Pure Lands in secular terms, one of the big problems is Bamboo nature, because you start off, we're going to have a utopia, guys, and then of course things fall flat. But nevertheless, we should recognize, I think, that anybody who has a vision of a world free from greed, hatred, and delusion is on a kind of Pure Land path, maybe of their own, maybe it's one we don't recognize, but one which we should appreciate and respect. Because even secular Pure Lands, or certainly in their ambition, can see themselves as characterized by selfless love. And I think if I want to make one, in my rather egoistic way, if I want to make one point today that people take away from this, is that nobody owns Pure Lands. You know, we, as Pure Land Buddhists, we don't own Pure Lands. And as soon as we start to think that the notion of a Pure Land is our exclusive property, as soon as we start to own them, then we exclude others. And they become impure lands, and they kind of slip through our fingers because we've tried to exclude other people's visions. For example, it's very, in my opinion, it's very difficult for nations to be pure lands, because nations tend to rally people around a flag, and that the very act of doing that is kind of, you're excluding other people. This is hugely significant at the moment in terms of, you know, worldwide refugee problems. You know, as soon as you set up the idea of a rigid, I'm not saying there's not practical problems associated with this. Of course there are, and there's problems with host populations and their needs as well and everything. But as soon as you start to draw lines on maps, then you are excluding the possibility of a pure land, really, because you are being selective about who you let in. So my contention is it's only by acknowledging and respecting other people's pure lands and their notions of the pure lands and their vision of a pure lands that we can live effectively in our own. So if we criticize other people's ideas about what constitutes a pure land, the instant we do that, our own pure land disappears by that very fact that we're making that judgment. So an aspiration should be that the inhabitants of different pure lands should celebrate each other's pure lands. And it is in accepting the pure lands of others that we gain admittance to our own. And the comparison I'd make here, and this is a bit tenuous, I know, but the comparison I'd make here is that I often think about the vows of Amida, and that he essentially, in making his vow, he decides that he is going to make his own gaining of enlightenment conditional upon ours. He has to, this is self-imposed, if you like, but he says to himself, I am not going to accept enlightenment unless I make it easy for others to gain enlightenment through the vows. And similarly, I don't think we should, you know, we should make our own, I do think we should make our own getting to the Pure Land conditional upon allowing other people to get to their Pure Lands as well. I know that's a bit perhaps difficult to describe, and I'm still kind of formulating it, and I would be very grateful for people's ideas, but I think this is what we should mean, or what we can mean, by ecumenicalism. So just finally though, okay, so we've got all this thing about, you know, everybody's Pure Lands are wonderful and we should respect them, and that's a way forward, and not just within Buddhism, but in our relations with non-Buddhists. But in our daily spiritual lives, what is it that pulls it all together? All of us here this afternoon, however many of us are there, all of us this afternoon will have our, even if we read the same descriptions of the Pure Land, we will still have our own internalization of it, our own view of it. So what is it that stops all these different views kind of fragmenting everything and throwing everything into chaos and, you know, splitting an order up or whatever it might be? What is it that unifies us? The Nembutsu. Okay, the Nembutsu is an umbrella. We've had some great Nembutsu chanting sessions yesterday, and we're going to have some more this afternoon with Samprinana. and some chanting with Sanghamitra. And, you know, we're all going to have slightly different things going on in our heads at this time. What is it that unites us? The Nembutsu. Okay. We can have it's an umbrella which can shelter everybody. Okay. So that's it, really. I mean, I just think the whole notion of a pure land, whatever we think of it and however we interpret it, the whole notion of a pure land tests us about our faith. You know, it's the contrast between our notion of a pure land and the ordinary bamboo world that we live in from day to day. The contrast between those two things is the kind of dynamic which drives our spiritual practice and our faith. So that's it. I would really, really welcome people's comments on this. I'm sorry, it's a bit kind of, it's still tentative thoughts in my head, but thank you very much for your time. I would welcome comments. Namo Medhapu.